All right, hey everybody, welcome back again to class. Good morning. We have a couple minutes till it's 9, but until then, just good to see you guys. Hope you had a good weekend, and we'll get started in a few. Couple more minutes. Hey Eva, good morning. Gigi says hello. Hey Senna, good to see you too. Another minute. Hi Drew. Always good to see you guys back after the weekend. Hi Lily. Everybody here, appreciate you guys. Early morning rising. Okay, well, it's essentially 9 a.m., so I'm going to go on and just start off. Thanks again, guys, for being here. It's always great to start off the mornings with you guys on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So what I want to do is just basically finish up the last little piece of material from the article by David Lewis of the paradoxes of time travel, and then we'll start moving into the new subject for the semester, which is the philosophy of mind. So we'll get a little transition going into the next topic, but I have a few little loose ends that I still wanted to make sure we tied together there at the end of the David Lewis. So just for a few more moments. Okay, so basically, the last leftover thing in this article that I do want to speak about is something or whatever having to do with the last example of the grandfather paradox. Okay, so let's just kind of get right back into this. David Lewis's article is all about the concept of time travel and whether it's even possible. And he thinks that it is, and he's trying to make these arguments in the paper that whatever seems to be absurd, contradictory, paradoxical about it is not actually something that makes it impossible. So he tries to defend the claim that there's nothing absurd or contradictory about time travel. So a few things he says along the way. He starts by saying, is the whole concept of time travel itself a contradiction because it seems to essentially involve a discrepancy between two different measurements of time? You know, like if a person got into this so-called time machine and they zoomed ahead 4 years, but they only spent 5 minutes in the machine relative to their watch, what's the deal? Did they spend 5 years between when they got in and when they got out, or did they spend just 5 minutes? He distinguishes that there are two different types of time. There's personal and external time. And if we have these two different ways of looking at time, then there's actually no contradiction because we could simply say that 5 minutes of personal time divided departure and arrival, but 4 years or whatever of external time. Okay, and then there was the question about how many people are talking on the phone if a person goes back into the past and places like a call to themselves in the past. It looks like it's two, but on the other hand, it seems like you're talking to your previous self, and that's just the same person. Lewis's answer to that dilemma is that it's actually one person, but it's two temporal parts of the same person. So this is why it gives off the appearance of being two. And in the space-time diagram, we could show how multiple temporal parts of the same person could be located in space and time at the same time if they made these trips back in the timeline to the past. Then, okay, we were getting into this thing about the grandfather paradox, right? So just it involves kind of almost like a little science fiction scenario. Imagine that a person wants to go to the past to kill their grandfather way back when the grandfather was young. And this person that's going back there, if they succeed, then they would have eliminated the person who, you know, led to their own existence. So the question is, can this man succeed in killing the grandfather? And since there's some plausibility to the both yes and no answer, that seems to some people to be a contradiction. Like on the one hand, if he's there in the past and he's got a weapon and he wants to use it, why shouldn't he be able to succeed? But of course, when you think of the larger story that we're in, the man has been born. He's clearly there in the past. He took a trip in a time machine. So whatever happens can't possibly prevent him from being born. Otherwise, he wouldn't even be there in the first place. So the answer that Lewis ends up giving is that for the universe to remain logically coherent and consistent, he's going to have to fail in his attempt somehow. But it'll probably just be for an ordinary reason. And that's the case. In a time travel scenario where a person goes back to the past, a logically consistent one would not have it that they are able to do anything differently. But now what about this question, whether he could or couldn't? This is the last thing I wanted to just review. At the tail end of that discussion, here's what Lewis does to sort of eliminate the appearance that there's some type of paradox. He discusses this. So, so two senses of the word can. All right, so there's the narrow sense and the broad sense. Okay, so let me just describe what these two senses of the same one word can are. The narrow sense is the meaning of the word can according to what you can do given a limited number of factors, a more narrow range of factors about you. So what one is able to do given a narrower range of facts. And then the broad sense of can is what one is able to do given a broader range of facts. Okay, so hopefully those are easy enough for you to see. There's the top definition, the narrow range, the narrow sense of can, and the bottom, the broad sense. To explain with an example how to think about these concepts, let me give you an example, okay? So I want to ask you guys that are watching this a question that it will sound pretty straightforward, but you're going to notice as we talk about it that there's a little bit of a tricky subtlety to this question, okay? But just give me your most ordinary, like, natural answer. If someone just randomly asks you this, hey, yo, can you speak Russian? Can you? Yes or no? Tell me. We're thinking of the word can, and I'm asking you a question. Can you speak Russian? So you would know that. I don't. Okay, Drew, you're saying no. Eva, same, also saying no. Probably nobody can, okay? I mean, I'm not saying I know that for a fact, but just it's not a common language to study as a second language out here in America, so probably nobody has unless you have some special connection to, you know, Eastern Europe or Russia yourself. Okay, so you're saying you can't. But let me now ask the question a little bit differently, okay? If I was to compare you to, like, just a dog, you know, or my cat that's on my lap, I don't know which example I should use. Let's go with the cat. Compared to a cat, can you speak Russian? That's sort of a different way of asking it. But now I'm asking you, can you speak Russian, like, in comparison with if a cat could? Okay, you're saying yes. You're saying yes? Correct. But let's think about that. Why is it that the first time I asked you, you said, no, I can't speak Russian? But then I said again, well, what if I was to compare you with a different animal, like a non-human animal, like a house cat? Can you speak Russian versus the cat? And you're saying yes. So good, Eva. The difference here is in the sense of the word can that we're actually using, okay? So in one sense of the word can, if we're looking at the big picture, and another sense of the word if we're just tunneling in and zeroing in on, like, more specific facts about you. So in which of these two senses can you speak Russian, the broad or the narrow sense? When we include more facts about you, or when we just narrow it down to more, you know, narrow range of facts? Which of the two senses of can do you think is implicated when a person like you says that if I compare myself to a cat, well, then in that sense, yes, I can speak Russian? No, Eva, it is in the broad sense. Because, okay, according to what facts are you able to speak Russian? Not just, like, if you look at me and how much I've studied and, like, you know, how many classes I've taken on the topic. No. It's considering a big picture view of you, like you're a human being. Human beings have, like, the physiological and mental capacity to take on different languages and learn them if they want to, like, if they try, okay? So when we consider just this set of facts about you, that you're a human being and you have the ability to learn new languages, then in that sense you can. But when we just focus on a more specific set of facts about you, like, okay, I'm Eva, I've never studied it, I've, you know, never opened a book on it, I've not taken a class in it, I've not spent any time there, so to this point, no, I can't speak it. But in the big picture, like, since I'm a human overall, then I can. Okay, does that make some sense to everybody here? Not just Eva, but, you know, all the rest. You guys understand what I mean? So that gives us the ability to kind of have it both ways when we say this can you speak Russian question. In one sense, no, because I haven't learned it yet. But in the big picture sense, sure, because I guess I could if I really, really tried. Okay, it's sort of like me, right? Like, or maybe some of you, like, can you run a 5-minute mile? Well, maybe not given your current training, right? But, like, if you really, really focused on it and trained as hard as you could, then I believe in you, and I think you could. I think I can too someday. But so far, 5:21 is my best. Anyways, like, so that's the point. Now, coming back to this question that the author poses in the scenario of, can Tim kill his grandfather? It seems like a paradox because one part of you wants to say, yeah, he can. Another part of you wants to say, not really, no, he can't. And now Lewis is saying that, well, by introducing these two senses of the same word can, narrow versus broad, we kind of get to have it both ways. So looking at Mr. Tim, just in the narrow sense, it looks like he can. You know, like, for example, that he's there on the scene. He's got the weapon that he needs. He's got the motive to do it. So it looks in that sense like, yeah, sure, he can. But then if you look at his big picture, like, oh, well, he was born in the end. And, you know, whatever happens can't eliminate the case that he's born because he obviously is in the past taking this trip. when you look at this big picture scenario, it seems like no, he can't. Okay, now that explains away the appearance of a paradox in this grandfather case. But I just wanted to kind of close the whole topic now by bringing it a little bit more into relationship with you, like a little bit more relevant to your life itself. So like if this space-time theory stuff is correct, then the more interesting reason to think about these kind of wild time travel possibilities is what it implies for all of us, just as everyday human beings, you know? So as you're watching this lecture, you maybe I could ask you this question. Could you have avoided watching this lecture? You think you could have just not watched it today? What answer would you give to that? You think that's something that could happen or could, well, now you've already started watching it, but do you think that if we go back, it could have been that you didn't watch this? Like that was something that could happen. Can it be that you didn't watch this lecture today? I don't know. You can tell me that. What's your feeling? I mean, you're watching it now, but could it have been otherwise? I can't answer the question for you. I'm asking it. You have to answer it. Well, you say, Jason, in the broad sense, well, no, actually, it's the other way around, Jason. When it comes to this whole time travel discussion, the narrow sense is the sense in which you have more possibilities, because you just kind of like, oops, don't talk about the fact that space and time are all controlled by everything already happening or every event already existing. So in the narrow sense, it seems like, sure, you could have avoided watching the lecture. Like if we think about things like this, oh, I could have overslept, or I could have just wanted to watch the news all morning and focus on the election, or I could have wanted to like play video games or just, you know, whatever. You think about those as alternatives to what you're doing now. And you're like, I could have done those things. Why not? But when we take a step back and we zoom out and we look at like you're a part of the universe and you're just an object in space-time, and according to the space-time theory, every object and all of its temporal parts are fully laid out in space-time and they all exist. Well, if we look at you in that sense, then nothing that you do is something that you could not have done. So it's weird. It's like it seems now as if that's having the implication that this is part of your destiny or whatever. You know, you have a destiny and a fate, which you're not capable of really altering. So you're kind of more like an observer on the events of your life and not so much in charge of making sure what happens, which is a strange thought. I don't know. In the end, the interesting metaphysical possibilities of free will and predestination loom large in any discussion over the science and theoretical implications of space-time theory. But, you know, that's something that I feel is not necessarily only within the domain of this science theory. I find that that's actually a point of contact or agreement between both secular and religious paradigms. If you believe thoroughly in God, then God knows everything. God is omniscient, as we start the whole class talking about. If God's all-powerful and omniscient, then there's nothing that could happen in the universe that would be a surprise to him. So he knows all, including all events of the future. So, you know, if you're a theist, then you could believe that there's predestination because God has a plan for every person's life, and there's nothing that happens which is unknown to God. So God could be the author of the blueprint of the universe. Or if you're more of a scientific person, or, you know, you have that kind of scientific realism, as some people call it, then you could argue that, okay, well, the universe is also thoroughly determined by the laws of physics and the nature of space-time. So it's like the room for freedom of the will is somewhat in question on either perspective of how the universe works or what its ultimate origins are. But I still think it's interesting to contemplate the possibility of free will despite these results. I've spent some time thinking about that. I do believe we have free will, but it's a little different maybe than the classic idea that means you could just do whatever. I think free will does not necessarily mean the ability to act counterfactually, like to do something contrary to actual fact. I think it has a little bit more to do with knowing the reasons why you're doing it. So you're kind of like free when you understand why you're doing things, instead of free on the basis that you really could have just done something completely else otherwise. But anyway, there's a lot there. But that's the last things I wanted to sort of close the whole time unit of the class with. So I'm going to now clear the board, and we will start moving on to another topic. This week, I'm going to distribute the next essay prompts for everybody. And there will be 3 different possible topics you could choose from on that. One will be epistemology, so theory of knowledge. Another will be time, so the stuff that we just covered on time. And another possible topic would be the philosophy of mind, which is what we're going to start to work on and develop starting right now. So you have three options. We'll talk a little bit more about that at one of the next meetings this week, but I'll distribute it, and that's going to be due in like 2 weeks from Friday. So there's going to be over 2 weeks to work on it. Okay, so now we're going to go over another new topic in this class, and it's the philosophy of mind. Philosophy of mind. As I've said before, there's a lot of different subject areas in philosophy that people are interested in, that have been spoken and written about for a long, long time, thousands of years. We've covered a lot of those topics just in brief: philosophy of religion, ethics, epistemology, metaphysics of time. And now we come to a new subject, which is the philosophy of mind. So the philosophy of mind, as the name kind of gives away, it's all about the mind, consciousness, thought, perception, experience. Not everything in the universe has a mind. Like, most things don't. You know, if you just, I guess, were to take like the mass of things that have got consciousness versus those that don't, it's overwhelmingly mostly just non-conscious, non-cognitive stuff. You know, rocks, trees, that's just on the planet Earth. When you go out into space, you just have gaseous, like stars and planets, asteroids. But things are not like thinking, feeling, perceiving, having, you know, judgments. If you just look around here, there's tables, chairs, there's markers, there's a ceiling fan above me, the clothes that I'm wearing, you know, but none of that stuff has consciousness. Consciousness is really interesting, obviously, because it's not just being an object, but being a subject, having a subjective point of view on things, having a viewpoint from which you can perceive. The universe would not be interesting, really, if it would, I guess, would have the potential to be interesting, but there would be no minds to think about it. But if there had never been consciousness that developed or emerged in the universe, it would just be a big expanse of just void space with random objects in it. So consciousness is really something that I think is very fascinating, and just because we're conscious beings, there's a meta aspect to it. When we think about the mind, we're thinking about things like us that can perceive. So the existence of consciousness, though, and the mind, it raises all kinds of tough questions, like, well, what is the nature of consciousness? So here are some of the big questions that we will consider in this unit. Are the mind and the brain the same thing or two different things? Are the mind and the brain the same, or are they two different things? Obviously, when we think of consciousness, the brain figures into our thinking about it, or what it is, or what causes consciousness to exist. The brain, as it seems, according to like science and neurochemistry, is like the seat of consciousness. If you have traumatic head injury, that can have alterations to your consciousness. So we know that the brain is responsible for consciousness, at least physically, but then people have a question: is really the brain the whole thing? Because if that's the case, then there's no possibility for consciousness to exist apart from the physical brain. So like, for example, if you thought the brain was the whole source of consciousness, then what happens if the brain dust to dust? It decomposes after death and there's no longer a functioning brain. Then that would imply that without the brain to provide the basis for consciousness, then there wouldn't be any. Like, there couldn't be a disembodied consciousness floating around like a spirit or a soul. Some people believe that. That's called physicalism. But other people disagree. They say, no way, the consciousness that we have does reside in the soul, and the soul does not depend on the physical existence of the body. It can persist and endure even if the body is completely annihilated, as people say when regard to the afterlife and the belief in a heavenly afterlife, or at least some kind of post-mortem existence as a consciousness. So some people affirm that the mind and the brain are not the same, because the brain can be destroyed, but consciousness can persist. Other people, though, hold that they are the same thing. And so it's two words for the same idea: brain, mind, same thing. But that's debated. And we will talk about both sides of the debate: what's called dualism, which says there's both, and physicalism, which says, no, it's all just the brain. Kind of related to that topic or question is this: could consciousness be explained physically? So something as rich as consciousness, you know, the ability for you right now to like think back to your last birthday, or just think forward to like maybe your graduation, or you know, feeling pain, pleasure, hope, fear, anger, you know, anticipation, excitement, all the different experiences that are possible in the inner life of your mind. Is that something that can really just be totally explained on the basis of neurons and synapses firing and the neurochemistry of your brain? Some people say yes, the brain is just a very fantastically sophisticated physical object which produces consciousness. But other people think, no, there's something about consciousness itself that resists a physical analysis. There's something about it that must be essentially non-physical, maybe spiritual, or at the very least outside the realm of physical explanation. So that's a debate. And you know, another question that we'll touch on in this part of the class: could a machine ever think? Okay, so consciousness, whatever it is, us human beings, definitely we have it. But then there's this question: could any other things have it aside from, you know, like biological life forms? Could we, for example, engineer a conscious being using electronic and digital components? So, you know, like basically, could we make a machine or a computer that had the same kind of consciousness that we have, that could think, feel, perceive, judge, and experience stuff mentally? Now, some people say, no, that can't happen. Whatever a machine does is just going to be based on programming, and it's just going to have like an input and an output. It may sometimes exhibit behavior that outwardly appears to be cognitive, like based on having thoughts or consciousness. Like you can, of course, program like a chat bot program where it has very realistic conversations with you, just almost like a human would. And it could tell you during the chat, like, oh, I'm sad, or I'm having some fear, or whatever, you know, realistic kind of human-like conversation. But many people would believe that no matter how realistic or convincing it may seem, that that's not really consciousness there, that there's nothing it's like to be the computer saying these things. It's just a program, and there's actually no real cognitive activity. But on the other hand, some people say no, that consciousness that the brain produces is nothing other than a very sophisticated physical process. And so if we could somehow replicate the features of that in a man-made system like a computer, why couldn't the computer, the robot, cyborg, android, whatever you want to call it, why couldn't it also have consciousness? Some people think it could. In fact, the creator of the computer, the digital computer, Alan Turing, he wrote a famous paper about this, and he does defend the position that machines will be thinking at some point in the future. So we'll talk about at least Alan Turing's argument, and we'll also see all the objections to everything on both sides. So then, that just gives us a sense of the new topic and the sort of things that we're going to be questioning or looking into. We're going to sort of jump into the first couple questions here by looking at the work of a philosopher that we've studied at least once so far in the semester, and that is the great French philosopher Descartes. Before I put his details about this article up there, I need to kind of set the stage here for the debate that's going to happen, and that's between these two positions in the philosophy of mind. Okay, so two main positions in the philosophy of mind. Descartes is going to be defending one of these. Okay, so there is physicalism and dualism. Okay, so physicalism is the position that everything in this universe, everything, 100% of everything is made out of physical matter, including us and our consciousness. So according to physicalism, there's not two different things, the mind and the brain. There's just the brain. There's just the brain, and that's a physical thing, and there's nothing non-physical about it. So that's physical. Everything in the universe is made out of physical matter, including us and our consciousness. Erase this note here for a minute. Okay, everything in the universe is made out of physical matter, including us and our consciousness. I actually got to take a slight step back behind this to give you a more broad definition of what kind of view this is, because physicalism is a kind of what is called monism. Now, I know I'm saying two main positions in the philosophy of mind, and there are just two. There's physicalism and then there's dualism. But there's a little bit more subtlety to unpack with the concept of physicalism. So we're still working on one of these two main positions. But I want you to understand that physicalism, the view, is a version of monism. Monism says that everything in the universe is made out of only one kind of substance. Okay, so monism in the philosophy of mind claims that everything in the whole universe is just made out of one type of substance. Now, there are actually two different types of monism. There's physicalist monism, and then there's the other type, which is called idealism. So let me actually create a note for that here. So one type of monism is this. Physicalism. But there is also this one, and that's what's called idealism. Idealism is the idea that everything in the universe is made out of ideas, not physical matter. So okay, so monism is one of the two big paradigms in the philosophy of mind. Monism says everything's made out of just one kind of substance. So if you break everything down, it's all ultimately made out of the same kind of stuff. To the physicalist, what is this stuff that makes everything? It's physical matter. Some of you maybe know a little bit about basic concepts in physics, even if you've learned them either in school or just through your own life. Maybe somebody has a knowledge about what is considered or termed the least unit of matter, the smallest element of matter that's not further subdivisible. I mean, the ordinary, just everyday reference or term for that is the atom, correct? Now, to be fair, there are, in physics, we talk sometimes about subatomic particles and quarks and things, but the classic term for the least unit is the atom. That goes way back to the ancient Greeks. It actually means, by the etymology, not cuttable, and that means it can't be further broken down into parts. So whatever the smallest piece of matter is often called the atom. So physicalism, you can think of it this way. It says that everything in this whole universe is just made out of atoms, bunched together into different arrangements to form the larger objects that we see. So what's this table? Well, it's a big bunch of atoms bundled together in the contour and the outline of a table, and that's how the table exists, by being a bunch of atoms formed together into the table. But then me and you, according to physicalism, are also just very complex arrangements of atoms. Our bodies, our brains are just a bunch of atoms really bundled together, and they produce the biological life processes that give us consciousness, that allow us to, digest food, reproduce, or whatever else. Okay, so On the physicalist picture, our consciousness, our mind, is not something spiritual or supernatural. It's just a brain made out of matter, and that matter of the brain conducts the processes that we experience as consciousness and thought, perception, and that's all there is to it. But there's nothing more than just its material basis, its physical basis. Now, another version of monism is idealism, which says that every single thing in the universe is not made out of matter at all. According to idealism, it's like the opposite extreme. There is no matter. There's just thoughts. So what is this computer or whatever that's right in front of you? It may feel solid, like it has mass and everything, but in the end, it's actually just ideas that you're having. And so idealism is a weird view. To be honest with you guys, we're not going to really focus on it at all. We're just kind of mentioning it here so that you understand the definition, but we're going to set it aside. We're mostly going to be comparing physicalist monism with dualism, which is the viewpoint that both of these kinds of substance exist, the mind and matter. Okay, so idealism has some advocates, but not so many anymore. I think it's kind of gone out of fashion in the 20th and 21st century, but it did have a little popularity back in the 18th and 19th century. There were some famous authors who argued that, you know, the concept of matter is contradictory or something, and so it must just all be ideas. Weird thing about idealism is this, right? If everything are just thoughts, then what about the objects when nobody's there to see them or perceive them? Do they still exist? Like if nobody's at Chapman because of the pandemic or something, is Chapman still really a thing that exists? Because if it's just thoughts, what happens when no one's thinking the thought? Well, the most sophisticated versions of idealism actually say that God exists, and since God exists, when you're not thinking of something, then his mind is the mind that thinks of it and keeps it in existence. So things have their own kind of mind independent, well, independent from your mind existence, but they're still actually still thoughts because it's the mind of God that is conceiving of everything in the universe, and he can cause them to stop existing just by not wanting to think about them anymore. But anyway, I know that probably to most people, idealism sounds a little antique and perhaps unscientific even. So whether it's fair or unfair, we're mostly focusing on physicalism as a branch of monism. But now, what's different from both of these types of monism is dualism. Okay. So here's the other main position in the philosophy of mind. I know that might have seemed a little bit messy. I say here are two main positions in the philosophy of mind, and then it looked like I wrote three things. But really those three things written there were just to give you an elaborate understanding of monism. Monism says that everything's made out of one type of substance, but depending on what that one and only substance is, there are two branches of monism. You see, the people that think it's all just matter are the physical monists, and the people that think everything's just thoughts, those are the idealist monists. But on the other side of this debate are dualists who disagree with both of those. And the dualist gives this position, that everything in the universe is made out of two different types of substances. So they embrace that there's both. There's matter, and then there's mind. So that's what dualist says. Dualist would be a noun to refer to the person who follows that, like Buddhist. But dualism is the name of the philosophy, just like Buddhism is the idea, Buddhist is the practice or practitioner of it. So dualism, anyway. Dualism says that everything in the universe is made out of two kinds of substance. Now, what are these substances that are being discussed that could be the candidates for composing things? Well, the two kinds of substances are these. And we've been referring to them all along in passing. You've got matter, physical matter. Let me make that even more clear by writing the word physical there. Physical matter, essentially atoms, and then the mind. Now, the definition of these two things in this way of thinking about reality is pretty specific. Physical matter is just anything that is extended in space. Extended in space means that something takes up space, that it just occupies some mass and volume of space. This marker, of course, is extended, and you can see that because there it is, taking up this like region that is the outline of the marker. A thing that is not extended in space is literally like not anything at all in a sense. I mean, it's not anything physical. So if something's not extended in space, you've got to think about like in geometry, how a point has no extension, it has no dimensions. It's only like when they're assembled together into lines that they extend. So if a thing is not extended in space, you're tempted to say, well, there's nowhere that it is. It has no position, no mass, no volume. It's just not a physical thing. So physical matter, anything that's extended in space, and the most minute element of that would be the atom. On the other hand, though, there's the mind, and the dualist, unlike the monist, says both of these things make up reality, not just one or the other, but both. And so the mind, as it's defined here, is something that is not extended in space. And since it's the mind, it's something that thinks. Okay, so something that is not extended in space and is thinking. Not extended and has thought and consciousness. So the mind, do not confuse the mind with the brain, because the brain is a physical object. It's right there. It's in your skull. It has mass. It's a spongy, tissue. It's the organ in the brain. In the skull that produces consciousness, or so we think. But that's something that does have mass. The mind is more like a soul. Okay, it's more like the ghost in the machine or whatever that somehow is connected to the physical body, but it's not limited to it. The idea of the mind is the idea of something that could continue to exist even if the body was totally destroyed, because the mind itself isn't part of the body. It's not a physical object. It's not like a little, acorn or something inside the body that you would find if you looked really hard. It's just literally not got any shape, size, volume, or mass. A totally disembodied, incorporeal, as they say, consciousness. So the dualists say that both of these substances make up all of reality. Now, if you're a dualist, you would say, well, most of reality is made up just out of matter, because just look around you. Most of these things around you can't think. Just if we're talking about like the amount of mass. But there is consciousness, though, as you all know, as we all have. And according to the dualist, when it comes to consciousness, that's something that's not physical. So most stuff is physical, but consciousness and thought, perception, experience, that's something that is other than the physical. That's something that is not extended in space, but it yet is thinking. Okay, so we're going to have this debate now proceed between physicalism and dualism. So it's kind of like monism versus dualism, but the only kind of monism that I'm really going to pit against dualism is the physicalist type. Okay, so from here on, some of our discussions to follow will have to do with this debate. What is the correct position? Where are the best arguments in favor of physicalism or in favor of dualism? So we're going to, as we've done throughout the course, study arguments of both types. We're going to see people who are dualists and make the case that that's correct and that we should believe in dualism. And we will contrast that against others who say, no, physicalism is the right answer and dualism is false. Okay, so I'm just trying to set the boundaries of the debate for us so that you guys kind of understand the positions that are being tossed back and forth and argued over. Who's correct? Is it the monist, the physicalist monist, or is it the dualist? You're going to have your own viewpoints. Maybe you've already got a view on this. If so, that's great. You'll learn about what others think, or at least you'll gain further justification for your own view. And if you've not thought about this debate before, then now you have a new interesting intellectual conversation that you can engage with. Okay? So I'm erasing this, and we're going to start talking about the first author about this, which is going to be a return to the work of Descartes. Descartes, as we've studied before, wrote the Meditations. And he is a dualist. So we're going to start off by just looking at the dualist side of this debate and getting their argument clear. Okay, so this is back to now René Descartes. Okay, the great French philosopher who did live from 1596 until 1650. And his world famous book is The Meditations. From back in 1641. Okay, so Descartes, a dualist. This book, The Meditations, develops an argument for dualism by the time the book ends in the 6th chapter. Earlier in the semester, we read and studied the first 2 chapters of The Meditations. So there are 6 chapters of the book. Each one is titled Meditation, and then there's a number after that to give number of the chapter, basically. So there's Meditation 1, Meditation 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. We read 1 and 2. Today, we're going to take a look at the 6th one, the last one, and that's Meditation 6. Okay, so that's the subject or the topic, the reading assignment associated with this lesson here. Meditation 6 of Descartes' Meditations. Okay. So yeah, Descartes' a dualist, and as we've said, dualism affirms that there are 2 substances that jointly constitute reality and everything in it. There's physical matter, that's anything that has spatial extension, and on the other hand, the mind, which is a non-physical thing that takes up no space or matter, but can think. Now, his overall argument for this conclusion is based on the idea that we can conceive of the mind and the body existing separately. So just a little preview of his argument, because he has a pretty long and complicated argument to get to the conclusion of dualism. But just so you have a sense of the scope and aim of the argument, the big picture is that he's saying it's all about conceivability, because you can clearly conceive of the mind and the body existing apart from each other. Since that's clearly imaginable, that must be possible. And since the mind and the body could possibly exist separated, then they must not actually be the same thing. Okay, so now let's go over Descartes' argument for dualism, because there's a lot there. Okay. So this argument has a lot of premises. The way that arguments go is that you've got premises, which are like the evidence, and then the conclusion is whatever follows from those premises, or whatever the premises support. So we've seen a couple arguments throughout the semester, like, you saw the argument, the problem of evil. If God existed, there would be no evil in the world, premise 1. Premise 2, but there is evil in the world. So therefore, conclusion, there must not be a God. At least that's one argument. Well, here's an argument that gets to the conclusion of dualism, but there are many more steps. There are many more premises that lead us to that conclusion. So we got to take it slow and steady. Let's get started on it, though. And we won't be able to obviously finish all of the argument discussion today, but this is okay because in the syllabus you would see that there are 2 meetings devoted to the work of Descartes for this lesson. So on Wednesday, we have all that additional time to go over the rest of it. In a way, here's something I'm thinking. Because the argument is so highly detailed, and because I will have to break off midway through the presentation of it, I kind of almost feel like I should just start at the top of Wednesday with the argument in full, and that will not create discontinuity in your mind, like looking at half an argument and then having to be brought back into it kind of abruptly on Wednesday. So I think I'll actually hold off on that part and then just maybe let us go a little earlier today. But yeah, I want you guys to understand, though, what we have covered to this point in our lesson today. I've just tried to set up for you the new topic, which is all about the philosophy of mind. In the philosophy of mind, we discuss consciousness and its origin and its nature. What's the deal? How does consciousness exist? What is its ultimate foundations? Is it something just physical or not? And that basically leads to these debated questions. So monism says that everything's made out of one substance. Those that are monists can be in one of 2 camps, physicalist or idealist monism. Physicalism is the most well-respected and current-day popular version of monism because there's been a lot of progress in the sciences which seem to give a sense that it very well could just be a physical universe. So physicalism says that everything's made out of matter, including me and you and our consciousness, that everything's just a physical object operating according to physical laws. Even things that generate consciousness are physical, like the brain. Idealism says that everything in the universe is just made out of thoughts. There's no matter at all. God is, I guess, the thinker who keeps thinking the thoughts so that even if you're not there, the objects maintain their independence. And that's kind of been relegated to the sidelines nowadays, but it's still a view that some discuss. And then on the other hand of either of these forms of monism, there is dualism. Dualism affirms that both substances exist. There's the mind and there's matter. The mind is something that's not extended. It doesn't have any kind of matter. It's not material, but it thinks. And matter is just physical matter, anything extended in space. On the minute microscopic level, those would be atoms. To those that affirm dualism, I would say that's probably the mainstream widespread position of most people. You know, like if you just ask people, what do you think about reality? Do you believe there's a soul or whatever? I think most people do believe in that because if you just look at demographic tables, you'll see that the vast majority of people identify as a member of some religion. And if you're a religious person and you believe in things like the afterlife or the soul, then you would have to be a dualist because the soul doesn't exist according to physicalism and the afterlife doesn't either. So if you believe in these kind of spiritual ideas, and if that's something that you agree is true, then you would be a dualist. So when Descartes defends the position of dualism, he's defending the viewpoint that many people hold pre-theoretically, pre-philosophically, and giving you, I guess, a more robust reason to go forward thinking, yeah, that there's good reasons to believe that there's not just matter, but that there's also the mind, there's also the soul. So for those looking for evidence or arguments to boost up and bolster their conviction that there must be more than just the physical, then Descartes would be helpful towards that. But again, I've said that it's not just his argument. We're going to compare that against physicalists, so that'll take us into more contemporary writings of 20th and 21st century. And a lot of those people do say that there's just no room for the idea of the soul, that consciousness can be totally explained based on the physical brain. And so it would be in a way like unnecessary to make an additional assumption of something mysterious like a non-physical consciousness. But that's enough for today. We're going to really then launch into Descartes' full argument towards dualism on Wednesday. So I guess then, if you guys are good to go, let's just call the meeting for now. But have a good day. Let me know if there's anything you'd like or need over the emails. I'm checking those as often as I can. And until next time, just I'll see you back on Wednesday. Have a great one. Okay, guys? Everything's well? Let me know in the chat, or maybe just hit the like button. Okay, thanks, guys. Take care then. I'll see you then.